trip to Jerusalem, Jesus passes through Jericho. Upon leaving that ancient city, lots of people gathered around him. A blind man in the crowd heard that Jesus was nearby. His name was Waldersee. Jesus will not leave him behind, but grants him the request of his prayer that his sight might be restored. Centuries earlier, Joshua led the army of Israel and 7 trumpet-bearing priests to defeat Jericho. On the 7th day, the priests marched around the Waldersee 7 times and then blew their trumpets as loud as they could. The walls of Jericho fell outward. All the inhabitants would be killed, except for a woman named Rahab and her family. She would not be left behind for destruction because she had safely hid 2 spies of Israel, because she trusted the one true God of Israel to save her. And whether it be Rahab and her family in ancient Jericho, or Bartimaeus, the blind beggar sitting by the roadside, in the Jericho of Jesus' day, he always gathers up his chosen ones, leaving no one behind. Out of all the inhabitants of ancient Jericho, Rahab is remembered by God and saved. She did not descend from royalty. She was a Gentile and not part of God's chosen people. Nor did she have a godly vocation. Far from it, for she was a prostitute. And yet God knew her by name. He heard her prayer to be rescued and answered her. How gracious God is by giving Rahab, of all people, faith to trust in him. She could have been like all the rest of the people of Jericho and trusted the sturdy walls of her city for protection. But she didn't. She could have trusted the deaf and blind idols that littered the homes of Jericho. But she didn't. And God not only spared her, but gathered her together to his people. Even though God's people today come from every nation, from each generation in time, they all have one thing in common. They all cry to him for mercy. Every child of God knows that not everything in life has gone the godly way. Far too often the way of sinful flesh has led down a path of destruction and away from God. Rahab's desperation could have driven her into a life of prostitution. This way of life is certainly not from God. And yet, no prostitute who cries to God for mercy will be turned away. When she heard that the army of Israel was fast approaching to Jericho, she did not excuse her sinful life, nor demand that God accept it, but simply trusted that God would have mercy on her and save her and her family. In the Old Testament reading from Jeremiah, we read the prediction of how God saves his people from the north and from the farthest corners of the earth. They come to God with weeping and with pleas for mercy. He will lead them. They shall not stumble or fall from him, but their pleas for mercy will be heard. He called Rahab and many others to be his people and gave them faith in him for salvation, making them part of his people Israel. And so also in the New Testament, in the New Israel church, there are people from many different ethnic groups and nations, but they all have been granted citizenship in heaven and trust alone in the Lord for mercy. We now fast forward to the city of Jericho in the days of Jesus. It had been rebuilt at the cost of the king's son. A blind man named Bartimaeus was begging inside the road. Only the evangelist Mark tells us his name. In Aramaic, it means son of Timaeus, or highly prized, esteemed, or honored. Now, the son of Timaeus was not a wealthy prince, but a beggar. Without a job, he depended on the kindness of others for daily bread. Yet, upon hearing that Jesus was nearby, he cried out, "Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me." Like all the children of God, Bartimaeus prays to Jesus for mercy. Although his prayer is that Jesus would restore his sight, God had already given him the greater gift of seeing Jesus as King David's son, the promised Messiah of God, who would claim sinners for God's kingdom from every tribe and nation. Only by the gift of faith could anyone see that Jesus is God's Messiah, come to save us all. And this gift was already given to a blind man. Just as Jeremiah predicted that God will bring the remnant of Israel from the north and the farthest parts of the earth, and that among them will be found the blind, the lame, and pregnant women about to give birth. In other words, those in great pain and need. This prophet prayed for his sight, but Jesus had already blessed him with faith. And then he granted his sight so that Bartimaeus would now see the one to whom he begged for mercy. He does so because he wants no one to be left behind, whether it be a prostitute in Jericho by the name of Rahab, or a blind beggar in Jericho by the name of Bartimaeus. What are we all made of all this? Quite simply, salvation comes only through Jesus. The benefits of salvation flow from his personal presence as it comes to all creatures who are blind to the new creation, unless Jesus opens their eyes. In this sense, every child of God is blind to Jesus because of original sin. Yet in God's mercy, faith is given to see Jesus as the one who has come to save us. And then, in the great reversal of sin on the last day, Jesus will restore all our bodies to sinlessness and grant us eyes to see him. Truly, the steadfast mercy of the Lord is everlasting. And as Jesus healed Bartimaeus of his physical blindness, he will restore to every one of us vision from a resurrected body that is beyond death and the reach of sin, but perfect and sinless. Then we will rejoice in the presence of the Son of David and the Son of God forever, who makes us all well and whole. And oh, what comfort to know that Jesus leaves no one behind, including Rahab,